Okay, good morning from the lands belonging to the Arapaho and Ute tribes, otherwise known as Estes Park here in Colorado. And welcome to our third webinar on the US Trail Running Conference webinar series for 2022. And this morning, we're very honored to welcome our colleagues from the Runners Equity Alliance, who are going to be talking about empowering the trail and ultra running communities to end sexual harassment and assault. And so very, very powerful, inspirational topic, and really looking forward to what our panelists are going to share with you. So Crista, if you could bring up the screen share, and we'll get rolling with the. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. So before we get going, a big thanks to Marathon Printing, who are our presenting sponsor for the webinar series. And yeah, we're really thankful to them for enabling this series to take place and for everybody to participate free. So that was a really good thing from Marathon Printing, and they're well known for their bibs, but they also provide a lot of other endurance products for races. So definitely check them out. They come highly recommended. And thank you to Ryan and the team at Marathon Printing for helping us with this. Also, a big thank you to our friends at the American Trail Running Association for helping to promote this webinar series as well. Okay, Krista, next slide. And so, as I said, the title is really about ending sexual harassment and assault within trail and ultra running. And big thanks to session sponsor Salomon. And Salomon will make footwear, clothing, and gear that supports, inspires, and protects. And we're also very thankful that Salomon, for the races that they're sponsoring and supporting, that they have requirements for their races in terms of DEI training and SH and SA training as well. So thank you so much. Okay, Krista, if you could move on. All right, so just a little bit in terms of housekeeping. Feel free to use the chat function, and we'll take questions on the way through, but we won't actually get to answer them until the end. And so feel free to add any questions, and then we'll get to them at the end where we have a discussion and Q&A section. Okay, next section. So Jody, can you give us a wave? There we go. Okay, Jody Sanborn from the Runners Equity Alliance and WCADVSA, and Christa Scott Tappan from Runners Equity Alliance, Dirtbag Runners, and a Propeller Consulting Nike individual as well. So congratulations on that, Christa. That was pretty recent move. And last but not least, Dr. Christy Teranishi Martinez from Runners Equity Alliance, and also Professor of Psychology, Director of the Center for Multicultural Engagement for CSU Channel Islands. So yeah, really well, a really amazing set panelists, and we really thank you for all three of you for coming on and being a part of this webinar. So yep, there's Jody, and there's Christy, and there's Krista. Okay, so Krista, I'll hand over to you now. I'll mute myself and let you come in from here. And thank you so much. Looking forward to what you're going to share.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Terry, for that great introduction. And thank you to everyone who is joining us today. Some of you may be familiar with this work that we've been doing over the last 2 years. We've put a lot of time and effort into understanding, the current state of our community, especially within sexual assault and harassment. Obviously, this is a very tough thing to talk about, but it's also a really important thing to talk about. And we're really looking forward to sharing a lot of our findings, key takeaways from our research study that we've been conducting over the last about 1.5 years now, and giving some recommendations for the community. And so just to kind of set the stage for what our overarching goals are for this project, for this research, and for the Runners Equity Alliance initiative. So, number one, our initial goal was to just understand the prevalence of sexual harassment and sexual assault within the running community. And then, from there, we really want to foster awareness of this and the inequities within our communities. We really sought to increase communication and networking for alliances across our community. And I would say this is almost most importantly is creating a safe space for runners, and making sure that we're really paying attention to the things that impact those safe spaces. And this is one of our big goals, have a positive influence on the culture of the running community and racing community. And then lastly, this has been our kind of North Star is developing a code of conduct for race directors. And, this is a much bigger project than I think we initially anticipated, but we're starting to kind of piece things together, and we're really excited to show you what we've found. And before we get into the details of our study, we really want to share a little bit about our demographics and have a disclosure. So number one, in our survey, we regret that we did not include Two-Spirit as a gender category option. Two-Spirit refers to a person who identifies as having both masculine and feminine spirits, and is used by some Indigenous people to describe their sexual, gender, and/or spiritual identity. We highly encourage future surveys of any type that look at gender to include diverse gender identities and to provide this as an option. So our apologies to our community members who were not able to select this on our survey. And then secondly, we had a very small number of individuals who identified as transgender, non-binary, and gender fluid. And so we combined these into one category to protect anonymity. This is not an ideal situation, but it is a measure to protect their confidentiality and make sure that nobody could be singled out individually within our research. So a little bit about the demographics of our population for our research study. We had 1,500 roughly folks complete our survey. And as you can see at the top, we had a very diverse range of ethnicities, age ranges, and genders. We had more women fill out our survey than men. And that was really the only biggest difference within the gender category. This was really exciting for us and very rare for a psychology study. We didn't anticipate having such a worldwide research sample, but this truly shows, number one, how widespread the care is of this topic within our community, and how many people wanted to come together to try to not only understand the incidences of sexual assault and harassment within our community, but also understand it from a cultural perspective as well. And I just want to call out that the fact that we had somebody from Antarctica who filled this out is just absolutely incredible. So truly a worldwide initiative. And roughly 92% were from the United States. But as you can see, we had a lot of folks fill this out. And from here, I'm going to pass it off to my research partner, Dr. Christy Teranishi Martinez.
Thank you, Crista. And thank you all for really taking the time to be here. For many of us, running is our life. It's our livelihood, where we get away to get respite away from work, the hustle and bustle of our everyday lives. And it's really sad that this has entered our sanctuary space. So we really appreciate you being here to learn what is happening within our community. I'm going to be sharing some of the early statistics and also delve deeper into some more detailed statistics that we found recently. This is just the tip of the iceberg, and we have so much more analysis to do. So I just want to disclose today, I'm primarily going to share some statistics related to our findings with gender. And we're continuing to explore more analysis examining age and ethnicity. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that many different thoughts, feelings, and emotions may arise when you see these statistics. We've all either firsthand experienced sexual harassment or sexual assault, or know somebody who has. So it's really normal to feel however you're feeling when you're examining the statistics that I'm about to share with you. So out of the 1,502 participants or respondents to our survey, we found that 909 reported that they experienced sexual harassment and or sexual assault while running. 517 stated they did not experience sexual harassment or sexual assault, while 72 were unsure and 4 did not respond. So this is highly prevalent in this community. And it's interesting, over time too, it's important to acknowledge people's views and like processing having experienced it, and the meaning of these experiences come out differently, and it happens over time. So it's important to acknowledge those 72 that are unsure if they had experienced sexual harassment or sexual assault. And sometimes it comes out in different ways. Later on, you may be realizing, oh yeah, that one time that person, slapped my butt, it was not okay. But at another point in time, you might not have acknowledged that, so it's really important. Christa. So the next slide is really breaking it down by gender. So if we look here, comparing the different groups, the gender groups, it's prevalent, highly prevalent amongst females. We had 1,215 female respondents, 259 male respondents, and 28 that we classified within this small group of transgender, non-binary, and gender fluid. And it was highly prevalent amongst those. The females had more experience of sexual harassment and sexual assault, as well as the transgender, non-binary, and gender fluid group compared to the males. So this slide is very packed with information. We looked at different types of incidents that various people had. And so we could look within each gender. So if we're looking at the prevalence of these different types of incidents, a majority of females had experienced catcalls, unwanted verbal sexual advances. Those were the highest percentages, as well as stalking while running. For males, it was more prevalent to experience catcalls. And then there's a few that experience unwanted verbal sexual advances, stalking. Those were the next highest percentages amongst the males. And then for the transgender, non-binary, and gender fluid groups, again, catcalls were pretty highly experienced, as well as unwanted verbal sexual advances and stalking. So it's really important to look at within the group, but then comparing across these different groups as well. We did do some statistical analysis looking at differences between groups. And we found that amongst, when we're comparing them, females experienced significantly higher reported incidents of sexual harassment, sexual assault than men and the transgender, non-binary, and gender fluid groups. But then we also found that the transgender, non-binary, and gender fluid groups experienced higher number of incidents than males. So that was a key finding in our analysis. So we're going to delve into deeper by exploring the meaning of those incidents and what their qualitative open-ended responses say about the actual occurrences. So when we're looking at all the statistics as a whole, we also asked people how often they experience sexual harassment and sexual assault. So within an individual, how many times have you experienced these various types of incidents? And we found two distinct groups with those statistics. We conducted this using three different types of statistical analysis: Mahalanobis analysis, discriminant analysis, and cluster analysis, for those who are statistically savvy. And we found the same results over and over with these three different analyses, identifying these two groups. Those who experience fewer incidents, from maybe 0 to 2 incidents of sexual harassment or sexual assault while running. And then another group of outliers who reported very high frequency of incidents of sexual harassment and sexual assault. So this could be between 1,000 to 300,000 incidents over their lifetime. So for these individuals, it really reached a point of experiencing sexual harassment, sexual assault so often that they put the highest number meaningful to them. And these are real statistical findings. They stated that they experienced as many as 100,000 to 300,000 incidents. And we, at first, were thinking, no, that couldn't be. But after doing the analysis very carefully, and we, checked and rechecked, these are true findings. And those who frequently experience sexual harassment and sexual assault also statistically were less likely to run. And they stated that they changed how they run compared to the other group who experienced fewer incidents of sexual harassment and sexual assault. They reported also feeling significantly less safe, and they desired a code of conduct put in place for the running community. So here is our key research takeaways from our preliminary analysis. We did find similar results of other studies across various sports and athletic activities, from running to climbing to biking to even equestrian sports. About 61% reported experienced sexual harassment and/or sexual assault while running. And these are very consistent with the literature. Women experience sexual harassment and sexual assault significantly more than men, and transgender, non-binary, and gender fluid identified. Well, transgender, non-binary, and gender fluid individuals experience sexual harassment and sexual assault more than men. Findings are very consistent with the national statistics, with 1 in 2 women experiencing sexual harassment and 1 in 3 who have been sexually assaulted. It's really, really important to listen to these survivors' stories, to really understand the way that they've developed meaning and defined their experiences. Those experiencing more incidents said that they're less likely to run, and they've changed the way they've run, which can be running with a cell phone, not running at night, choosing carefully who they're running with. And they really stress the need for a code of conduct put in place in the running community. So now I'm going to pass it off to Jody, who will talk about what we can do.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. So thank you so much for sharing the findings of the research. Christy shared with us the enormity of, the situation. And so now I get to talk to you about, well, what do we do about it? All this bad stuff is happening, and what are we going to do about it? And so that's where I come in. As you saw on the intro, I'm with the Wyoming Coalition Against Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. I do this work every day. I'm the director of prevention for the state of Wyoming for all things violence related. And I'm also an ultra runner. I am an avid trail runner. If you're familiar with the Bighorn 100 Bighorn, that's my hometown race. So this is something that I care deeply about. And I just am very happy to be here and to share the space to talk about what can we as runners, as racers, as race directors, as outdoor industry leaders do to address this issue. So as you can see, we're saying the time for change is now. There's no better time than now to address this issue. Our study supports that. The direct quotes from those who participated said, that they support things such as a code of conduct as one possible option. But what else can we do? It's really up to us now to look at how can we change the overall culture of trail and ultra running so that we can create these safe spaces for individuals to feel that they can come to the trails, to come to races, and to not have to worry about their safety or if something should happen to them, whether or not they'll be believed. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time over the next couple of slides just talking to you about what that might look like. So we can go to the next slide, please, Krista. Okay, so what do we do? Research tells us, and you all probably know, that sport has incredibly powerful social capital. So that means that individuals within our community of trail and ultra running, we have that ability to influence others, and we have the ability to influence all of the outdoor industry when it comes to this. We know that sexual harassment and sexual assault is not something that is just limited and unique to the running community. There have been studies that have been conducted in the climbing community. They've been looking at things in kayaking and mountain biking, in all sorts of different outdoor industry related sports that say that this issue exists, and it exists at a very similar scale as to what we're seeing here in the trail and ultra running communities. And so we have the ability to say, hey, not us, we're going to take a stand. So as races and race organizations, we connect runners to the larger community so that we know that if we can be a positive influence for change, set standards for behavior for how we want to come to these spaces and how we want to interact with each other in these spaces, that can have a ripple effect out into other areas, that can influence other outdoor sports, that can influence others who are not necessarily tied to the outdoor industry, but reach out into our communities and, have that ongoing ripple effect. So basically, we want to use our platform to join people together around a shared vision so that we can be leaders in stepping up right now and saying that we want to prevent sexual harassment and sexual assault and ultimately put an end to it. If this is something that you're interested in learning more about, I encourage you to visit the Safe Outside Initiative, which was a project sponsored by the American Alpine Club that really first kind of dove into this within the climbing industry. And you can also check out Reliance, which I've put a link to here. And they really look at how we can utilize sport as a catalyst to help end sexual violence in our world. Okay, so we're coming to you all with this idea of there are three main pillars that we believe we can put into place to help support an equitable community. We know that violence, and specifically sexual violence, sexual harassment, are rooted in inequities. That's really what's at the core of creating violence. And so we need to transform our community into one that's more equitable so that we can see decreases in rates of violence. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to believe and support survivors. As Christy so eloquently laid out to us, we have a lot of survivors in our community, survivors of direct violence, as well as those who are experiencing ongoing harassment. 1,000 to 300,000 separate incidents of sexual harassment is a big deal. We know that this exists. People aren't just making up these things for a variety of reasons. We know that sexual violence is the most underreported of all violent crimes, and we know that it's also the one that is least likely to have a false report. People don't just go around making false reports about experiencing sexual violence. So when someone says that they have experienced sexual harassment or sexual violence while participating in trail or ultra running communities, chances are they're telling the truth. We need to believe these folks, and we need to be able to provide supports to them. That's one of the key pillars that we can put into place into how we can shift this culture, into one that is equitable and supportive. So how do we do that? We build our knowledge and skills. We're doing that by participating in these webinars. We're learning about the incidence rates. We're learning about how we can be leaders. What are the small steps we can take to step up and help put an end to violence? And when we build our knowledge and our own skills, we start to shift our attitudes towards these topics, towards how we interact with survivors and victims. And it changes the way we show up as a community, how we respond when we do hear that these things are happening. And more importantly, if we're shifting our attitudes to ones towards respect, towards support, then we're reinforcing these values that we want to uphold as a community. We want to be a community that is safe and supportive for all runners. And so we want to be able to truly reinforce that. Second pillar that we're proposing here is that we want to encourage you all to be agents of change. We titled the session here, I think, something along the lines of empowering the trail and ultra running communities. This is really what it's about. Like, you all have the ability to influence and affect change. And to do that, we're asking you all to take leadership in this, to be a part of fostering this positive community culture and to disrupting harmful community norms. We're not saying that everyone has to be an activist. Like, that's not what we're doing here. But we're hoping that we can teach little skills along the way. We can implement policy and practices so that we come together with a comprehensive approach for how we're going to address harassment and violence in our community, to say that it doesn't have a place here, and that we want to be that agent of change. And then that all comes together for our third pillar here, which is to create a culture of respect. If we're doing those first two things, then a culture of respect is something that should just organically come out of that. It involves us working together instead of siloing, instead of saying, oh, well, that race over there is the one that has the policy in place, or doing some of that. No, we need to work together to where we're saying, hey, we as a community have these shared values and beliefs, and we're willing to put these out there together to say this is who we are and what we want to do. Also involved in that is having these safe environments. And what does a safe environment look like? I'm going to talk about that in the next slide. And ultimately, we know that all of these things, when put together, will have a positive influence on society. It's that ripple effect that I was talking about earlier. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what are some of these easy, tangible things that we can take away from here? Some of these best practices for how do we go about creating safe, respectful environments for running. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to establish standards for behavior. Now, I want to just preface this with saying, these are options. These are recommendations that you all can do. And we are more than happy to work with you all if you're race directors, or if you are an outdoor industry brand, if you're looking for how can we do this, get in contact with us and we can help walk you through what that looks like. What do policies look like? What do codes of conduct look like? What do waivers look like? How does that all play a part? We're happy to help you out with that. So recommendations here under establishing standards for behavior. First thing that we're going to talk about is code of conduct. And a code of conduct is pretty straightforward. It's saying like, these are the acceptable behaviors for participating in our race, something like that. We'll give an example, I'm jumping ahead. The waiver we'll give an example of. But a code of conduct is just basically saying, we don't tolerate acts of sexual harassment within our community. I don't know how many times I've signed up for a race and, I've read on the race information that it says, we as a race reserve the right to kick you out if you're rude to one of our aid station volunteers or any of the other racers. And, you might not be ever able to come back and participate in another one of our events in the future. Like, why don't we have something similar to that for people who are participating in the races, that says like, we don't tolerate acts of harassment towards other racers, towards volunteers, towards race staff, etc. It's real simple when we think about that. Like, you can't be rude to an aid station volunteer, but you can catcall somebody out on the course. Like, think we need to check ourselves on some of that. We can put that into place here when we're talking about things like a code of conduct. The next thing is the waiver with the race registration. A waiver should be tied to a code of conduct if that's something that you decide that you want to start implementing. We'll give an example of that on the next slide, so I'm not going to go into it too much right now without giving it all away, but just know that the waiver reflects the behaviors that you outline in that code of conduct, or it can be a bill of rights, you know, whatever you want to call it. You know, it doesn't have to sound scary. You know, code of conduct might sound scary to some folks, whatever you want to call it, but the two are related. Now, liability. Liability is one that I am not an attorney. Want to make that very clear here, and I'm not giving legal advice. So what's important to consider here is, what is your liability should sexual harassment or sexual assault happen at your event? And that's something that I'm happy to chat through with other folks. I'm currently talking to a couple of race organizations specifically about this, but you know, it's looking at your insurance and what coverage happens there. So a lot of people are worried about, oh, well, if we kick somebody out because, you know, they were sexually harassing someone, can they come back and sue us? You know, that's the type of conversations you need to have with your legal counsel, but also, you know, you can look through your liability insurance. You know, I would say if you just make it to where it's the standard for participating in the community where that type of stuff doesn't happen here, you know, hopefully people will know they can't come to your race and be a jerk, basically. Okay, so modeling standards of behavior is our second best practice here that we're talking about. So as race directors, as athletes, as outdoor industry brands and leaders, you know, you have the opportunity to be that leader that we mentioned on the other slide. You know, set forth the types of expectations that you have for everyone who participates in your event and model those behaviors. You know, that means not allowing jokes, inappropriate jokes that are sexist or racist or misogynistic. You know, we hear those things every day. They're in and out, you know, like calling those things out and saying, hey, you know, like that's not okay here in our race. Eliminating any sort of discriminatory or harassing behaviors or materials from your advertising, from websites. I know a lot of people say, oh, we don't do that. But some of it still exists, you know, some of it exists just in the way that race directors and staff talk to the participants, the language that they use at the races. It can be discriminatory, it can be derogatory, you know, all of that stuff creates a culture that says it's okay to treat people with disrespect in this environment. We need to eliminate that type of stuff to where, you know, it's more of a culture of respect and support. And then another bullet point here is that race directors can choose to adhere to the code of conduct and make no exceptions. I think make no exceptions is a really important one here to highlight, in that we don't give exception to people who have certain levels of sponsorship or certain race directors or certain people who have a lot of social media clout or, you know, something along those lines. We have to stop thinking about how do we protect those who are doing harm, and instead think about how can we support those who are being harmed in the community. You know, we know from our data that people who experience harassment and assault change their relationship with running. They change their behaviors. If they're experiencing harassment or assault, they're less likely to run, they're less likely to feel safe, and their behavior is going to change as a result. Maybe that means they're not showing up to participate in your races in the future. Maybe that means they stop running completely, or they're telling people, you know, don't participate in this race because they allow this type of stuff to happen. You know, like, make no exceptions here. Let's believe and support those who have been harmed, and also create environments where harm won't exist to begin with, and not make any sort of exceptions for those who, you know, are professionals or have just been doing it a certain way for so long. You know, we see that too. Okay, so the next piece here is establish a written policy specific to sexual harassment and sexual assault. So this is another one where I encourage you to consult with your legal counsel if this is something that you really want to dive into. And also, you know, with boards of directors, however your race organization or your brand is set up, you know, there is, you know, support there and considerations that need to be made. But as race directors or as a company maybe that's sponsoring a race, you have that ability to decide what you're willing to do. And maybe that means you want to establish a zero tolerance policy that says we don't tolerate it. If we hear that, you know, an act of sexual harassment or sexual assault has happened at our race, boom, you're done. You're out, and you can't finish the race, and you can't come back and compete in the future. You know, that's up to you to decide. And there's a process, you know, that would need to go along with, you know, how that would play out. But again, I encourage you to consult with your legal counsel if that's something that you want to look into developing. So also in thinking about written policies, as a race participant, participants can consider only participating in events with zero tolerance policies on sexual harassment or assault, you know, because they know, hey, they take this seriously and they support people in our community. And that's a type of race that I want to participate in. So, you know, really specific here when we're writing these policies, they need to be right on with sexual harassment and assault laid out there clearly. Happy to chat with anybody offline a little bit more about that one if you've got direct questions on that. And for clarification purposes, I see a code of conduct as something different from a policy, a zero tolerance policy. So I want to make sure there's no confusion about those two things. I see them as two different pieces. Happy to chat with you about both of those. And then also best practice, I've said it so many times today, but it's just believe victims and support survivors, and you can provide support. You know, there are lots of little things that you can do as a race director as to providing information and resources to those individuals. We're happy again to connect you with the best types of information and resources that exist within your communities or within your state or national resources, so that those are made available to folks should they experience or need support around sexual harassment or sexual assault. I think that's that for that slide. Okay, thanks, Crista. Okay, so as promised, here is that example of that waiver language. So again, that little disclaimer here that we are not attorneys, nor are we offering legal advice. Please consult with your own counsel if this is something that you want to look into. So as I said before, you can have a code of conduct that sets the standards of behavior for how you want people to participate when they show up in your events. And then that needs to be tied to the waiver language. We think that that might be an easy way to make that connection. So when you're signing up on Ultra Sign Up, you know, you've got the big long waiver that says, you know, yeah, I acknowledge I can be struck by lightning, or I can have, you know, a bear attack me or something like that during this race. But then you can also include a little bit that references your code of conduct and the standards of behavior that you have set forth for participating in your race. So this is just an example of something that we put together that we thought might work. It's just an example. It can be modified. So name of your race strives to create a safe, fun, and supportive environment for all runners. By participating in this race, you agree to the blank code of conduct, and that you will engage in respectful relationships, fair play, appropriate sporting behavior, and equity for all. Furthermore, you understand that any acts of harassment and violence against other racers, volunteers, staff, and/or spectators will not be tolerated and may result in removal from the race and/or future participation in your race. So it's pretty straightforward. It references the code of conduct that exists, so, you know, maybe on your website, in your runner's manual, all of those things. People read it, sign off on it. And generally what we found when we've been reviewing the legal side of things with insurance is if you sign off on it in your waiver, generally you're protected under your insurance. So again, that's a question to talk about with your insurance provider and or legal counsel. Okay, so I'm going to leave you all with this quote here from Reliance. It says, sport culture and systems influence broader society. The standards and expectations of acceptable behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs of individuals in sport and of sport organizations can shift the way society views, responds to, and works together to end sexual and domestic violence. So just want to leave you all with that as we think about the influence that trail and ultra running has and potentially has with our larger community when we think about those ripple effects that we want to be putting out there. And just want to leave you all with, the hopefully motivation to think about how we can be a leader in the outdoor industry when thinking about how we want to end sexual harassment and assault. So Christy or Crista, I think turn it back over to
Got
you.
it. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Jody. And I know that I could probably speak for everyone when I say that it's just incredible to watch you speak and listen to you speak about these topics. We're very grateful to have you on this team. And also with that, this is not just the work of Jody, Christy, and I. There's a lot of people that have come together to make this work happen. And so we have several people we want to thank. First of all, Dr. Harley Baker. He is a long-term research mentor to both Christy and I, who helped us analyze this data. And he is just a brilliant researcher and really helped us understand the data and specifically the story behind the data, which I think is so powerful. We have two amazing research assistants from Cal State University Channel Islands. Actually believe they both recently graduated and are now onto graduate school. Michaela Shapiro and Julianne Martinez. The four of us, so me, Dr. Christy, Teranishi, Martinez, Michaela and Julie will be presenting at the World Psychological Association, I believe at the end of April. And so we're really excited to continue to share this research within this world of psychology. I would also like to thank Alison Cebuela for her help in the early Runners Equity Alliance team organization. Kim Bessler, who many of you know was the person that was the catalyst to start this conversation in the first place. Our Runners Equity Alliance, there have been many people who have come in at different points in time over the last 2 years to help us on this initiative. Charlie Liu and Dr. Callie Renison are the two main researchers who we contacted who had, and Christy, I forget the name of their researcher, I think it's Safe Outside, is it? Their initiative? Yes, Safe Outside. And so they actually had originally looked at the climbing community. And so we had the ability to meet with them and get advice about, conducting their survey. And we actually replicated their survey as closely as we could, because one of our overarching goals within this project is to take our research findings and share that with Callie and Charlie so they can compile. Right now they're working on an industry-wide, so outdoor industry-wide initiative to look at the prevalence of sexual assault and harassment. And so we're going to be able to add our research findings into that comprehensive data analysis, which is very exciting for researchers to have that. With the more participants, the more power you have in your findings. So we will definitely be sharing more about that as those pieces come into play. And then Tara Murr, Kelsey Brown, and we also really want to thank Terry Chiplin. Thank you so much, Terry, for giving us this platform, for being our advocate, for encouraging us and helping us to connect pieces along the way. Terry has been helping us for the last, I think, year and a half, finding a platform to share this work. And the US Trail Running Conference is the perfect platform for us to be sharing our findings. So thank you so much for that. And also Solomon, who has sponsored this session. And then last but not least, everyone who participated in this survey, whether you shared the survey, you took it yourself, or you were a participant in the conversations. We really saw the community pull together for these findings. And I know that a lot of our audience here today don't come from, or are likely not to come from a psychology research background, but to have a data set with over 1,500 respondents is huge and very rare. And so that to us was very shocking and exciting. And as I kind of said before, the more folks who fill out a survey, the more powerful those findings are and the more plausible the results are, right? And so we're just very honored to be able to, take these really impactful stories and information and findings that people have shared with us and try to find the story behind it and use that to drive forward our goals within the community. And just to kind of reiterate again, this is just the beginning of us sharing our findings. This is the first time that we just looked at, gender and how that plays a part, but we really hope to look at ethnicity and different other demographics to understand fully, the intersectionality that plays into this topic. And with that, we have a little bit of time to talk through some questions and, maybe dive in a little bit deeper on any topics that we've had throughout this presentation that anyone would like to hear more on. Our time is limited and we might not be able to answer every question, but please feel free to reach out to us if you would like to learn more or would like to help and support. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and read one of the questions that we had from Sally Henkel. So I'm just going to read it out loud. So Sally said, there have been fairly well-known race directors in the trail running and ultra running space who have a reputation or many reported incidences for sexual harassment at their events that they have committed. What is the responsibility of this community and sponsors to address the race directors who are committing these acts and holding them accountable? It seems as though when these actions are addressed, there is a whole lot of silence on behalf of the sponsors and word of mouth to warn others not to participate. And that's not enough and shouldn't be the solution. This is a really great question. And I just want to set the stage for a discussion between Jody, Christy, and I on this question, because many of you may know that this the Runners Equity Alliance, this research, this topic, this group coming together happened as the result of one specific race director. And I'm just going to say, at the start that legality is a big thing coming into play in this space. And it's very tricky when the people that are meant to uphold the safety of the community are the ones that are committing the acts of violence, especially against community members. And so that is the most unfortunate result of our community work. And I would love to pass this off to Jody or Christy to kind of dive in a bit more on this topic, because there's a lot to unpack here, and I want to make sure that we're very mindful of how we address this specific question, because it's really important.
Sure, I'm happy to hop in here. Thanks for getting us started, Crista. So, this is a fantastic question. Thanks, Sally. It's, if you remember back a few slides ago when I was talking about, when I was talking about those 3 pillars, one of the first things that we needed to do was to educate and educate ourselves, build our knowledge around the issue. First, we have to inform people that sexual harassment and sexual assault happens in the first place. And as you can see by our data, it happens a lot, 1,000 to 300,000 incidents per person, it's mind-boggling, right? So that tells us that this is happening. So when we know that something is happening and we can believe the data, then we know, well, we have to support these people that this is happening to. So when we hear incidents of this one race director he's got a reputation for doing this and, you know, doing other things, you know, that's not so great. You know, like we're more likely to believe the person that he's doing these things to than his excuses, or his victim blaming, you know, responses. And so like we can start to shift the community culture around who are we going to believe and who are we going to support when we hear these things happening. So that then, you know, we can take it a step above that. You know, we hear these things are happening, the community's outraged by it, instead of just being like, oh, well, he puts on really cool races in cool places. So I guess if I don't have to like talk to him, maybe I'm okay still going. You know, no, we'll just be like, no, that guy's a jerk. I'm not going. You know, like we're not going to support it. And, you know, when he applies for sponsorships or, you know, support from the outdoor industry for his events, you know, those folks behind, you know, the money will say, no, we don't put our money into these events that are ran by this person or that allow this kind of stuff to happen in these places, you know. So it's multifaceted here. It's not as simple as just like, oh, we cut them off, you know. It's like, well, we cut them off because we as a community have a certain like agreement as to it's not okay to do this, and we're going to show up and support the survivors instead. You know, we're going to hit them where it hurts by cutting his sponsorships or access to, you know, like people aren't registering for the event, you know. So that type of stuff happens, you know. And I agree too, like there is a place that we need to be having other folks show up as positive role models that, you know, calls in those people who are doing these harmful things, that says, you know, like, yo, bro, you can't be doing that, you know, like this is not okay for you to be using your position of power and authority to be treating other people in this way as a race director and thinking you can get away with it, you know, like that's not cool. And what you've done to others in the past isn't cool too, you know. Like we need to find those opportunities where we can call people in and let them know that their behavior is not okay and it's not going to be tolerated. But, you know, also those with the money have to make that decision too. So I see there's stuff happening in the chat, but I also don't want to take up all the time. So I'm going to pass it to Christy.
Oh, I echo everything that you just said. It's so important. And there are so many different layers to how we could put it into this. We do need to start at the top and really change the culture of the community and not tolerate any sexual harassment or sexual assault. And this goes on in many different sports arena. We see it in the NFL. We see it in their huge money-making industries. So I think, yeah, if sponsors can take responsibility and really, you know, not tolerate and not allow these people to continue to sponsor their clothing or their items or put, you know, their name behind them. I think that's one of the top ways to get them to stop. Also individually, each of us can play a role. We all need to play a role in this. Just by talking and sharing this information with fellow runners and people around you, it's really important to talk about this and to have a conversation around it, as well as individually make those choices. I would just say, I am not participating in those races, and tell others, do not, you know, support this person or this race because of these incidents. So I just echo everything that you just said. And I think all of us need to play a role in ending this sexual harassment and sexual assault, because it is highly prevalent. It is, it continues generation after generation. So I really, really believe in what Reliance is doing, trying to stop it within one generation. We have to stop it now, and each of us can play a role in doing that.
Thank you so much, Christy. And you know, one thing that I do also want to include in this conversation that I think the trail and ultra running community struggles with a bit. Unlike other sports that have kind of a centralized governing body, right? Professional sports and in many arenas, they have kind of one governing body that oversees everything and can kind of make more serious changes that impact the whole community. Whereas within the trail and ultra running community, it's more grassroots, right? It's more led by community members, and it's the collective effort of many brands and businesses and racing events coming together to for a common goal, right? And I think that trail and ultra running, in the last decade especially, has just grown exponentially, and we're in this kind of tough spot where we really could use something like that, but we've gone so long without it that it's really challenging to try to make changes like this, right? Within sexual harassment and assault, for example. And so the power of change really lies in us as individuals and within business owners, race directors. And that's why a lot of the conversation that we've had throughout this presentation is directed at race directors and community leaders, because they're a lot of the ones that can enact that change at the organization level. And then as individuals, word of mouth, in the comments, people were talking about, we need to name names, right? And I do want to say that, there are a lot of conversations that happen, not necessarily in a public eye. For example, for my community, Dirtbag runners, we have private Facebook groups for our ambassadors, and we've had many discussions naming specific race directors and individuals in the community that have caused harm to our community members. And one example, also with Western States, I watched them very closely because they were a key sponsor of the race director that we're talking about, who committed an act of sexual assault and violence towards another community member. And they ended up dropping this race director's events as a qualifier. And then later things changed with that. But I do want to say that, Western States did show a good example of that. And I think that other organizations should really follow. And I've seen a few races, drop, folks as being sponsored athletes before, but then they shy away from making statements about that, which I think is unfortunate, because that's the educative piece and kind of the letting the community know that this is not tolerated, and it's an indicator, right, to people in the community. And so I think that, moving forward, my hope is that we can all be more vocal and communicate more and not let things happen. And communication is really the number one thing that we can do in this space. Number one, communicate. And number two, believing and supporting survivors. And as Jody said, people are not making this up. And that topic came up very often when this conversation started, 2 years ago, about incidences of sexual assault and harassment for people in the community. And I just really want to drive that home, that people are not making it up when they say that they have gone through these experiences, and it's up to us to support them, and then together to not allow that to happen in our community any longer. And so I just really wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to listen to us today, listen to our research. There's much more to come, but this is really our stepping stone to a greater future together. So thank you. And with this, I'll pass over to Terry.
Thank you, Crista. Okay. Yeah, wonderful. I'm such an important conversation to be had. And I'm really proud of your courage, the three of you and your colleagues that have carried out the research. And it's so important to, data doesn't lie. And I'm kind of borrowing that from Jody. I've heard her say that a couple of times. But yeah, such an important conversation. And thank you so much for taking the time to share this information with us. And yeah, really excited. I mean, I think now it's one of these situations like, now you know, and I think it's down to the community, the trail and ultra running community, to carry on the work that you've started and really take this on and move forward with it. There's definitely a lot we can do better, and it really scared me when I first came across the data when you shared that with me, and you know how big the problem is. So thank you so much, and yeah, thank you so much for the comments, and Mike Casper, I'm glad you were able to make it on the webinar, and Sally, I love your question. I think that's very relevant, and we look forward to having the toolkit that the Runners Equity Alliance is going to be working on and producing, and so we look forward to seeing those recommendations for best practices. Yeah, thank you everybody for being here. We'll wind up now. It's just gone noon at my time, and we look forward to the next webinar is April 21st, so the day before Earth Day, and we'll be looking at sustainability and latest innovations on producing green races, and we'll look forward to that. And again, a round of applause. Thank you so much to our panelists for being here and sharing your expertise and knowledge so eloquently and passionately. Really appreciate your work. Yeah, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody again soon. Take care, be safe, and treat each other with respect. Thank you so much. Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you all for being here.
Okay, I'm going to end the recording.